Welcome to a new episode of Manage to Retain, where I talk about issues around business for employees, your customers, recruiting, retention, productivity, and profitability. And I do it with my friends, Sherri and Lou. Listen in, you might get a few tips here on how to do leadership better in your business.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Manage to Retain. And I want to take a quick second. There was a conversation that we had about what does this manage to retain mean? It's not the task of managing people. Manage to retain is all about the task of leading, the task of leadership. So you can lead your people to retain better retainment status, retain them better as a leader. And in this episode, we're going to talk about some of that I think will be really useful there around the effectiveness of leaders and seeing where they've got their blind spots. My name is Vinay Raman. I am the CEO of Carmo. We're a company that takes data and turns it into empathy graphs. So as leaders of companies, people that work within companies, you can start to understand where your blind spots are as an individual from the data, from raw, unbiased, objective data that tells you here's where there's an opportunity for growth and renewed strength. But that's all based on facts and data. That's just one side of the equation. The other part of that is the leadership narratives that you must level yourself up. And in order to do that, I've got my two friends, Sherri and Lou, who teach a lot of those leadership principles. Sherri and Lou, how are you all doing today?
Excellent, Vinay. I love that clarification you made there at the beginning. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about that just before, right?
Yeah.
I'd love for you all to spend a couple of moments to talk about what you do, because leading with influence is, I think, something that everyone may not know that they need, but they need in order to up-level themselves as a leader. Can you talk about what you all do?
Yeah, you see, it's interesting how we realize and we look at people, we even vote for people based on the influence that they've given, right? That's what we do. So everything that we do as a leader has an influential moment. And what is it that we do and how do we do it in a way that actually draws in people to do and accomplish the task we want them to accomplish? In the way we want them to accomplish the bottom line's happening, and does it consistently and long term. Well, what we do, Sherri and I are co-owners of the Lou Everett Group, and we have a team of people that focus on nothing but identifying where those gaps are so that it can be we can sustainably grab a hold of those things, address them, and make it so that your influence is on purpose and accomplishes the bottom line sustainably.
So I might summarize sort of what Sherri and Lou and myself do is, if you want to become a more effective and more influential leader, this might be a great place for you to spend some time. If you don't, it may not be the greatest use of your time. Mm-hmm. But today, on this episode, I want to talk about this tool that actually Sherri and Lou helped build. We turned it into an assessment and specifically into a visualization that you can see. We've taken the qualitative assessment of leaders. We've got some demonstration data from a company. And what you'll see is various people, various leaders, when they answer this questionnaire, you will start to see how there are blind spots for each leader. And there's also strengths. But now if you're aware of what those strengths and those blind spots are for each individual, either as the individual himself or someone who is leading that individual, it gives you a lot of visibility and transparency as to where the areas of growth could be and where the opportunities and risk exist. Sherri and Lou, is that a fair way to kind of package up what we're going to lean into next?
Oh, yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm a data guy. I love my numbers and stats and facts and everything. And I'm going to present to you, based on some data that we have, information from a sample company with some demonstration data, so that you can see what these people look like. And each person has got a different profile. Hopefully you're not surprised to hear that, because each person is unique. And that uniqueness is not only their super strength, but it's also their kryptonite. Mm. All right. So we've got this demonstration data from a company that we've named Fictional Company. We've put that in there because it's fictional. We don't want to give away the names of any real companies, and we've changed the name of the individual to Betty at test.com. Now let me walk you through this so you get a sense of what this is. So we've gone through and surveyed a number of people. Okay, there's a list of probably 20 odd people who've already taken this specific assessment here. And the average person has got a score of a 65 out of 100, right? 100 being highly effective, 0 or 1 being very low, low or highly ineffective. Betty has got a score of a 60 out of 100, to just slightly below the average person. And this enumerates where those areas are. Very strong here compared to the average in terms of how open are you to suggestions from coworkers and partners. Betty is very amenable to that, strongly agrees with that mindset. Your willingness to take responsibility when a team member fails or to deliver against expectations also very strongly agrees with that statement. But as you can start to see here, as we go down, there's some places where there's less agreement with that statement. Let me show you that visually. The blue represents Betty. The gray represents the average person who's taken this assessment. And this big graph here, in the most effective leader case, it would be completely blue. So you can see kind of how, in this case, Betty's compared to the average and where there are potential areas. So I want to stop there for a second, because all these areas of white here are all the areas of growth for Betty. Sherri and Lou, looking at Betty here, just looking at this graph, just kind of what's a gut feel here in terms of who Betty is, and is she a very strong leader? What are your thoughts?
I think it's important for us to know that and understand that surveys like this, right, assessments like this, especially this one, we've targeted in a way that first addresses a few things. Number one, self-awareness. Because if a person's self-awareness as a leader is very clear, they know themselves very well, then we're going to see an interesting balance between that and what they know and perceive as and know as being a highly influential or successful leader. And we're going to see that kind of a balance in here. And in this particular case, when we look at Betty, we said that there is some gaps and some imbalances there on their own self-awareness, perhaps even just some basic perspectives, as an example, on tasks being managed and people should be led. Like right their agreement on that. Well, they don't really agree with that statement. They believe that people should be managed or something similar. And when now we kind of know, okay, there's a gap there in understanding what an influential leader really means and what a leader and what's the difference between a leader and a manager, because there are big differences there. And that could give us a little insight as to how they also lead as how they manage or lead people, right? So in this case, I think there's some room for growth for sure. And she's an average leader, very normal leader, but yet has a little bit more self-awareness outside the norm. That's how I see it. What about you? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. I think this is just a really great overview, and it gives you that, high level, that above ground look, and you can do a snapshot of that individual. And it's a great conversation starter too, because as maybe her leader above her can look at this and actually have a great starting point of a conversation. Be like, hey, what's great? What do you think? What needs are some opportunities? So I think this is a great way to lead into other conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So I would ask anybody who's kind of listening in here, hopefully you in listening to this came here because you wanted to understand how you could find more effectiveness of your leaders and the leaders within your organization. And this is a tool that will kind of start to give you the strengths and the needs of all those various individuals that are leaders within your organization. Now, I think one of the things that comes to mind here is we can clearly see there's some strengths that Betty already has. Open to suggestions from coworkers or partners, willingness to take responsibility. She's got a deep sense of accountability for what her role is. That's something to be cherished, right? I wish I could find more people with that level of accountability. Mm-hmm. They're willing to take suggestions and perspectives from it. So it's not an ego-driven personality here. They're willing to kind of get consultation from others collaboratively to find the right place to go. That is a strength that this individual brings to the team. But being correct is more important than being right, and than being able to find what the right answer is. I think than being right. Below average. So this person, there's a little bit of a intellectual dominance component to this individual, right? They want to make sure that they're right in the situation. That's going to color how they make decisions. This is not about a matter of right and wrong. I think what this helps lay out, Sherri and Lou, I'd love your thoughts here. I think this helps, I say there's no such thing as an irrational person. You can only be irrational to people like outside of you. What you do is completely rational to yourself. Even in fits of anger or rage, you're doing things that make sense to you in your mind. It just may not make sense to others. This now starts to give you an understanding of why some of those behaviors from Betty in the past may have looked irrational to you, but may have made complete sense to her. Sherri, Lou, thoughts?
That's exactly right. That's exactly how this is measured. There's a big difference in being correct and being right. Just when you say those, you can just tell the difference, right? It's there is a one is more of a collaborative, and one is more of, hey, it's me. Whatever I say goes. And this kind of gives us an inclination of where this person's inclined to lean towards. Are they more inclined to lean towards that kind of a dominant style? I'm right, no matter you do what I say kind of vibe, as opposed to being more open to, okay, while this is the correct standard operating procedure, why don't you tell me a little bit more about what you're saying before I make a decision whether or not this is the right way to go.
So I think there's another piece that we can take a look at here, right? As we start to look at Betty, and we can start to look at the average, this average also kind of starts to tell you where the strength, if this is your senior leadership team, you can start to see where the blind spots are and how your leadership team makes decisions, right? You consider yourself to be more emotional, right? She considers herself to be more emotional than the average. It seems like your leadership teams thinks they're incredibly logical. Well, what I realize is that logic is highly personal. It's my logic is not the same as your logic. So everyone on this leadership teams that thinks they're very, very rational in the way they make decisions, they're not considering emotions in that, which may be a huge factor that they're overlooking in how decisions are made, because people buy because of emotions. They take action because of emotions, not because it makes sense. They buy that Porsche because it makes them feel good. And then they look at the $98,000 price tag and say, oh, I can't do this.
That's right.
Emotions that made them get there.
Yeah.
By the same token, you agree this task to manage people are led. The average person in the organization looks like they're more of a taskmaster in the way that they run things. I might say this is not necessarily a very empathetic team. Betty actually brings a lot to the table with regard to that. So, Lou and Sherri, I'd love your kind of thoughts and reflections on that. I'd love any from who are listening in from the audience. Do you see that as well? And can you see how being able to compare and contrast how Betty adds to the team and what the team has as an overall average, how it influences their decision things? I would love to see that in the comments. But Sherri and Lou, what are your thoughts?
What you hit on there was very good on the emotion side, right? The reality of it is as people, we are emotional beings. While you might think of yourself as more rational than emotional, the reality of it is that that's not our natural human condition. Our natural human condition is we are emotional, and as leaders, we need to understand that we many times, if we were to not think before we do anything, we react based on emotion. That's just what we are as humans. That's what we do. Not to say that every one of us has different levels there, right? Some of us might have the ability to stop, think rationally, then make the decision many times than others. But reality of it is we need to be aware of where we fall within that realm of decision. Is it more on the emotional? Is it more on the rational? If we were to say, oh yeah, we're way more rational, which is you're going to see here in this graph where a lot of the leadership team there feels that they're more rational than emotional, we have, as you mentioned, there is some challenges we got to look at here. Because in that case, then we've got to say, well, how can we balance this out and realize that we are emotional creatures, which means that those of you lead are emotional creatures, and how do we lead those people if we're not going to be understanding and empathetic in that case? With the tasker managed, people are led. Well, that's kind of self stated there, right? Reality of it is people are led. We manage tasks, not people. When we begin managing people, that's when we begin having challenges with our retention.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to show another person. Let's pick another person here, Fred. Completely different profile. So average is 65 again. Fred is at 37, and we see that a number of scores here that are below average. as we start to talk again about sort of the balance, ultimately we have a well-balanced team with all the right perspectives. For me, perspective is more important than intelligence. Intelligence is important is secondarily to that perspective. If we have plenty of intelligence on this team, that's good, but we have some blind spots here. And it seems to me that just by looking at this particular person, I don't know how much they're adding in value to this team. They might actually be drawing the whole team collective down. That may be intentional, but that's kind of my first gut reaction here. Sherri and Lou, what are you thinking? I mean, this person has got a very low score in terms of these things. What, as far as effectiveness as a leader, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I'll stop you there, is just because it's just that once that I consider myself to be a leader and the person does not feel like they're a leader. And that's okay, really, because not everybody can be a leader. It's okay if you want to follow the leader and you're really good at execution and you're really good at just like, hey, give me an order and I'll follow through with it. That's great. We do need that. I firmly believe that not everybody wants to be a leader, and there's some folks that just need to be that better of a supporting role than being to feel like they need to be a leader.
Now, we all have at some point in our life and career as a leader have felt and kind of been in Fred's spot. I mean, that's the reality. We've all started somewhere. And looking at this right away, Fred is most likely just joining Leadership 101. He perhaps is either learning, they're trying to work him into becoming a leader, or perhaps he was put in a position very quickly and has to learn now to be an effective leader and doesn't really consider himself one yet. And so there's a lot of learning and opportunity here now to begin mentoring and coaching Fred. So and I would say right off, but looking at this, that Fred is either brand new in a role as a leader, or he's checking just to see where his levels are as a leader. But on the team, he certainly would need to be mentored and guided by those that have a little bit more tenure.
So let's pick one other person. I'm going to pick Michelle this time. Another person, score of a 43 out of 100 versus a 65. Tasks are managed, people are led. She strongly agrees with that. So it seems like she's got a clear distinction along those categories. She considers herself to be more emotional. She also considers herself to be rational. So this is an interesting person. She feels like she has the ability to shift in both of those capabilities. I mean, that's a strength that she'll bring to that team. It's a unique superpower that she'll bring to the team. And I do want to express this idea that the way we're reading this has nothing to do with reality. It is simply a perspective, what reality potentially could be. These are highly contextual, would have to be in the situation to get a much better understanding. And we have to sit down and talk with Michelle in this case to find out what's really happening. This is just our kind of reading the tea leaves to try to see if we can figure out what actually exists. Yeah. So for the audience, I would love to understand, when you look at Michelle here, what do you see, or what thoughts come to mind? Do you see that she adds something to the team, or is she detracting from the team because of some of these lower scores here as well? I'd love to hear what you think. Please enter it in the comments. Sherri and Lou, thoughts, reflections?
Yeah, I think it's and I like your clarification there. You got to keep in mind that, you know how when sometimes, when at least during the pandemic, and even sometimes now, when you can go online and make an appointment with your doctor to do virtual, right? You can do a virtual kind of an appointment with your doctor, and the virtual appointment with your doctor, there'll be some things that they can review, and perhaps it was a test that was taken, and he or she's reviewing the test, and they might say, all right, this is good, but I need to see you now in person, really to kind of give you my full diagnosis. You see, that's what we're doing here, right? We're kind of taking an example, showing you, hey, listen, these are points that we have to take into consideration as a leader, but now let's take it and drive it home by really getting there and down to the nitty gritty. We need to bring in certain components to really make that happen, like being there, bringing the person in, having talks with them. There's some structured, very specific dynamics that need to be put in place, including principles that need to be applied in order for us to really understanding where these gaps are and how that can happen. And that's exactly really where the data that you provide and the strategic approach that we provide come into place.
So now consider anybody who's listening in that if you could take this information, because you now have an understanding, you can empathize with how Michelle believes and thinks of herself as a leader. Imagine if you could see the whole organization that reports up to her direct line of reporting up to her. Do you think you can see how this would help you understand more of why that organization is operating the way it is? Because bias is not a good thing or a bad thing. It is just simply that, a bias. Bias can be good, can be bad, both. Now that you understand Michelle's bias, you can see that reflected in the decisions that are made in how her organization works. It will also give you the tool to say, if we want to get these performance and these results or changes in behaviors, I see how I can support Michelle. For example, if she is your part of your senior leadership team, where you could support Michelle to become a better leader, to lead that behavior change within the organization. It gives you a roadmap to change intentionally within your organization. Sherri, Lou, thoughts?
No, that's exactly right. I agree with that 100%.
Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm just hoping that if you've been listening and that you've got a snapshot, this is a free assessment that you will get in the comments. You can take this, you can take it if you would like to take it for your whole team and find out what the average for your team is. Just simply type in team in the comments and just type it in all capital letters so that I'll know to look for that TEAM, and I'll make sure that you can get this assessment. This is something that I developed with the expertise that I got from Sherri and Lou. You'll get a score for each individual on your team. You can get a score just for yourself, or you can see what the average is across your whole team and find out where the blind spots on your leadership team are. This assessment takes all of about 2 minutes and will give you I'll call it a microscope and a set of binoculars in terms of what's happening to your organization. You get so much transparency, and lots of things will start to make a lot more sense. So again, type in team in capital letters in the comments if you would like to do this for your whole team, and I'll get you a link so that you can do that. But I want to kind of come back to you, Sherri and Lou. You talk about the 10 principles that all leaders need to lead with influence. Are there any principles that you think might come to mind here that really resonate after this conversation?
I think it's important for us, and I want to apply this a little differently. We generally will pull up we'll talk about a principle that'll apply with how a leader is going to kind of address what we just looked at. But I want to now do something a little different and take a principle that everyone that's listening should apply and what we're going over here. And that's the willing principle. So again, we have 10 principles that we believe that every leader must follow to lead with influence, that we have over the last 5 decades or so of our combined experience, knowledge, and training, and put it down into these 10 principles. And one of those is the willing principle. And the willing principle, we need to understand and be able to experience the possibilities. And sometimes that means we need to look at it different. We need to look at it different. And we need to be open to the possibility that there's need for change. There's need for that to happen. When change happens, growth happens. And so we're talking about things here that perhaps you as listeners might look at and it may not necessarily seem like it fits because it's counteracting to what you are normally doing. What I challenge you all to do is to be willing to go beyond that and change your perspective. You see, our opinions many times are molded by our outside sources and our outside influences, right? We call that our worldview. And if we can now adapt and change our worldview so that we then in turn are leading us first, that'll help us lead other people. That's what the willing principle is. So I challenge y'all to do that. Be open to the possibility that there's change and growth happens.
Well, I think that's a good nugget there to take home from all of this. For all those who listened in, I sincerely hope you got some value of spending your time with us. I'd ask one favor of you, though. I am a data guy. I like my numbers. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd like you to tell us how effective you thought this conversation was. 10 is highly effective, and 1 is not so much it's ineffective. It wasn't a good use of your time. 10 high, strongly agree this was effective. 1 low, do not agree this was an effective use of your time. Please type that into the comments so we'll get a sense of if this is bringing some value. But thank you for taking some time and listening in and participating in the discussion. But Sherri and Lou, as always, thank you for your insights and perspectives on how we could become more effective leaders.
You bet, Vinay. Thank you. Great
Welcome.
conversation.
Yeah. See you all soon.